I'm here in California, and literally once I moved there, I had to start from scratch, building a credit. So I had, I couldn't initially buy in the US. So I said, well, let me just keep going in Ontario. And that's what I did.
Hey investors, Bradley here from Watson Estates, and you're listening to the largest, fastest growing podcast for Toronto real estate on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. As a broker and investor, I love to keep track of what's going on in the market, but at the same time, I love having friends, other investors that are focused on the GTA come on our show and share the goods. Today, we have Thomas Lorini on the show to share with us what is a fantastic topic. I'm so glad we talked about this because he added so much value talking about mindset. So whether you're just getting started or you've been doing this for some time, you want a refresher, this is a really good way of looking at someone who in the last decade has grown a substantial portfolio and really how they've gone about doing it on the back end, the things you don't see, not talking about crunching numbers or specific markets, but actually how to go from someone who's just comfortable with a small portfolio to being big in scale. And what are some of the necessities of doing that? Now, he lives in Southern California, which is also really cool. So I was able to ask him at the end of our show about what's the difference as far as pros and cons between investing in the US and investing in Canada, which I know is a common question from some of our viewers. But make sure you guys please hit that like button and leave a comment if you have any questions for Thomas or I, and you can share this on Instagram and tag us at Watson Estates. I know you're going to love this episode. Enjoy the show. Thomas, thank you for joining us on the show. How you doing?
Doing well, Bradley. How you doing?
I'm glad to have you. I'm doing good. I am excited to have this conversation. You and I have actually interacted in the past while we were working on some deals, and but I'm excited to come have you on the show. I know you've done other episodes, but I would love for you to really have a place to tell us and teach us what the mindset of a successful investor looks like. But before we kind of get into that, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into real estate.
Sure. Happy to do that. So I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, born and raised, married, 3 kids, currently living in Southern California, live in Orange County. We moved here about 7 years ago. Started investing in real estate, I would say 2011. Prior to that, I just purchased my principal residency back in 2004, lived in that. Always wanted to get into real estate, but just didn't know how. No one in my immediate circle was investing in real estate. So for me, it was like, okay, I need to put myself in an environment where people are doing this. So I joined RAIN, Real Estate Investment Network, which was very popular back then out in Toronto. And immediately I joined the group. Within a few months, I bought my first, investment property, which was a duplex in Hamilton. So that really kind of got things in motion, really started learning all elements of investing. And from there, started picking up a property every year, every other year. We ended up transitioning a few years later to California, but I just built up a pretty good team out in Ontario. So I said, why stop? I'm here in California, and literally once I moved there, I had to start from scratch, building a credit. So I had, I couldn't initially buy in the US. So I said, well, let me just keep going in Ontario. And that's what I did. Just continue building relationships, picking up properties, and ended up starting to joint venture. So that became my MO for, up until today. I continued to JV on deals and basically started, growing different realms of real estate, expanding more and more challenging projects, getting to multifamily, getting to now a motel, that sort of thing. So it's been an exciting journey. And along the way, I'm all about sharing what I do. So I'm pretty active on social media, mainly on Instagram, Facebook. And I'm all about, I don't do specifically coaching, but again, sharing and spending time with people who reach out to me and helping them understand, the realm of real estate investing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and the people that around you, I get that sense. One of the things I asked you is if you were a coach, but I honestly believed you were a coach just from the way that I hear people talk about you. You're very involved in helping people along the way. So,
here's an example. I was back in Toronto last month for 3 weeks. Not to brag or anything, but I posted, hey, I'm in town, who wants to get together? I'm thinking 10, 12 people want to get together. I had to rent out Dave & Buster's and over 100 people showed up. So it was really a cool event to get everyone together. But it just gave me a sense of, all right, I'm helping people, and people will reach out to me. How did you get so many people together so quickly? And you don't even live in Ontario. And I think basically it comes to a testament of spending time. People DM me regularly, and instead of just blowing them off, I'll just kind of reach out to them, pick up the phone, call them and say, hey, what's up? where are you? What are you looking to do? And just spending like 15, 20, sometimes an hour with them, just out of my own time and day. And people appreciate that and they remember that. So I think when I kind of was in town, people were like, hey, they want to meet me in person, kind of like, just put a face to each other. And it was funny because a lot of people like, I don't even remember, because you're going back a year or two or maybe 3. And they're like, hey, you helped me to do this. You helped me to buy my first, property. You connected me with this realtor and so forth. So I just find value in that, not making it so like a system where I'm getting paid for it. For me, it's all about giving back. It kind of ties in with my faith. And ultimately, it just feels good to help others. And that's kind of like what I kind of signed up to do. And I continue to do.
Yeah. So I guess just to kind of set the tone. So we're going to dive into a lot of those things that you kind of touched on there. I'm very curious to get that development mindset, right? From starting to having a primary residence to building a duplex to now you're saying you're doing hotels and motels. But
right.
I also do want to touch very quickly at the end of the show. We'll talk a little bit about the US and Canada dynamic too, because I do get that question a lot. Should I be investing in the US? And I often don't feel qualified to respond. But you being a realtor in California, but also heavily invested in Ontario, I think you're well positioned to kind of talk about some of the pros and cons. So, but you talked a little bit about faith. You talked a little bit about, I love actually one of the things that resonate there is you talked about how when you first started, you weren't connected to a group, you connected to Rain, who I still believe is relatively active. What I find today, what I've noticed over the last few years is the investment community is becoming more connected through social media, through online. So in many ways, when I talk to people, even out of province and out of country, it doesn't feel like they truly left, right? So those people that joined your 100 some odd people that came out to see you, they didn't even fully appreciate that you were gone the entire time, even though for you, it felt like a lifetime ago.
It's true. Like, social media
kind of
brings
like,
us all together.
Yeah. Tell me how that network, because I'm very fond of the real estate investing network and how that association, but I mean, in general, the networking ability of investors. They seem to somehow the large investors, the ones leading the charge, are it's a very small pool. It really is a small pool. I feel like, I mean, many of the people have been on our show know each other. Like, it's not like we're just inviting a random person out. So tell me a little bit about how you've harnessed that.
I think networking and relationship building is such a key component for all investors. You need to kind of consider that and making it a priority. Too often we want to dig into the deal, number crunch, and then financing options. Okay, those are great. But for me, deals will come, deals will be out there. But relationships, building the time, because at some point you're either going to tap out your own funds. Deals may be more and more challenging to find, but having a really deep network is key, where you can easily make a phone call, raise the capital that you're going to need, make a few phone calls, and assign a deal that you have under contract. Few texts, a few posts, and you're looking for a deal, and someone brings it to the table. That takes time and energy. What do I say to people all the time? It's like, you look around, the closest people are the people you spend the most time with. So how do you develop a good, deep network? You got to spend time and energy. I used to go to functions, these networking sessions. They're all across here in Orange County, once or twice a month, constantly networking, putting my face out there, building relationships. And that's how I have a lot of clients today here in Southern California, because I'm not from here. It was from all the time I spend with them. And same thing, now that I'm not local, with the Ontario, network of people, I'm posting, I'm sharing, I'm spending time with them on the phone, texting, and then also associate myself with other groups. So there are other groups in Ontario, which many of them, we're familiar with, but posting, sharing, connecting, that takes time, but make it a portion or a segment of your investing, game plan. And then, you'll see the benefits. It's not an immediate, an immediate return, but it's one of those things that you plant the seeds and you're going to see the crops growing down the line. And I see it in my life and what's happened to me. So I'm here to share with you that take the time to network and build those relationships. It's not always about talking real estate. Like, just get to know the person as a human being.
Yeah, I'm short for thinking of other examples where that's the case. I'm sure there's the case where you got many relationships where you're just kind of like giving, right? This reciprocity that happens. But I don't know too many other areas of business that I've been involved in that is that heavy as it has been in the real estate investing world. And one of the other things to kind of add there is I find that because people trust and give so much, don't waste people's time, right?
Yes.
Give them benefit, and anything you ask for, make sure it's legitimate, right? So having an opportunity where it's like, so right now I'm going through a process where I've got several joint venture partners, and I know you're in this scenario too. I tell them, the joint venture partners, because my relationship, the joint venture partner is great, obviously, because they're giving money, but my
Right.
relationship with the people in the real estate community is also great. So part of the respect in the industry is don't go running looking for a deal until you're ready. Make sure everything is laid out, because it will be there. And the reason it's there is because you've been able to maintain a relationship and be truthful, be, accountable. When you say, I'm looking for this, and someone gives it to you, there it is, right? And you know that you're able to close on that. So
Yeah. And that's also important how you're approaching investors in terms of wanting to connect with them. If you're just sucking time and energy out of them, I mean, it's important that, you're careful. You want to add some value to their play as well. So
yeah.
if it's like, hey, I have a question, I'm a new investor, that's fine. But what else can you do for the person you're potentially approaching? If it's just blasting them with a list of questions, I'm like, everyone's got so much time, and there's only so many of these kind of conversations we can have. So kind of consider, hey, listen, I'm a new investor. I like to help you. What are you looking for? And then potentially that's an opening for, someone more experienced to be able to say, hey, listen, I'm kind of focused on, let's say, multifamily in a certain city or certain area. If you come up across anything, hear anything, let me know. And it got kind of, opens a conversation where it's like, all right, you're not there just to take, and you also want to give a bit as well. And then, more likely that the experienced investor will say, okay, listen, you're newer. There's like some suggestions I may have, but let's be in touch. So, and again, it's not all in one session. I mean, the first conversation may only be 5-10 minutes long. That's fine. And you follow up a month later, a few weeks later, a month later, and then something spurns out of it. So I always tell people, I'm like, listen, sometimes I'll reach out to individuals, say, this is just totally exploratory, just getting to know you. Nothing may come up now, but who knows in 6 months, 12 months from now. And that's what's happened over the last year. Like some people I met, through social media last year, now we're doing multi-million dollar deals. And it just started from some point. They share something, I share something, goes back and forth, spend some time, maybe I fly out, meet in person, grab lunch, and then things kind of progress from there.
And don't count anybody out, because the one you think is just getting started will beat you in a couple of years. That's another thing. So, okay. So that's
Absolutely.
relationship. I think that's a big component. And I love that that was kind of part of your intro, but I know you're also, what I really want to talk about too, is your mindset. I mean, you've gone in a relatively quick period of time in like the life of a human to building from a single family to duplex to now multi-family homes. So what has changed? What does that process look like? So if you were to kind of try and take it all the way back, what was your thinking there? And what, even in the last few years, have you noticed has really allowed you to spring forward?
That's a great question. I think initially when I joined Rain, like I only had my principal residency, and I quickly found out, I'm like, oh, wow, this guy's like 25, owns 5 properties. So it's like, how is that even possible? How can someone have 5 mortgages? It was just mind blowing for me until I took the next step and I got my second and third property. I'm like, all right, okay, I can do this. But then you get into a point where over the next 4 or 5 years, I mean, I kind of like maintain myself in that realm, buying one property here, single family, a condo or something. It's fine. But what I realized, okay, it's a slow process. And there's only so much capital I can save up or refi out a property, that sort of thing. So, and that's fine. If you want to maintain yourself at that level, that's fine. But for myself, I had this idea of I want to expand. I want to grow. And I think me moving to the US was actually the key trigger, because prior to moving, I only had about 5 properties. Well, once I moved, that kind of like really forced me to start doing things differently. And it forced me to start changing, the way I thought. I couldn't buy in the US initially because they want, traditional financing. You require 2-year tax returns. So I said, okay, I'm not going to be buying anytime immediately now in the US. Let me focus on this long distance thing. And that's where I started, reaching out, finding deals, non-conventional, off-market deals, and start, building relationship and partnering with individuals who are in Ontario. So that everything from like, I found a seller in Florida who had a property in Hamilton, and I tied it up, find a partner in Ontario, partner, and then flip that property. I'm like, okay, that's different. Starting to expand other markets. Windsor came on my radar about 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't know anyone in Windsor. I probably drove through Windsor once in my life, but I was just looking for other markets. So I got early enough into that market, start building a portfolio, but building a relationship with agents, property managers, making those phone calls, things I would never have done before, and finding properties that way off market, tying them up, purchasing them, doing the rentals, that sort of thing. And then slowly, this whole idea of, okay, I want to get to the next level, multifamily, and maybe Airbnb, those kind of things. And every time, I thought I get too comfortable, too complacent. I get motivated by other individuals. That's one thing I do as a lot. Is kind of, all right, am I okay where I am, or do I want to continue to expand and grow? And that's where I'm like, well, the time and effort to do smaller deals, sometimes you can actually do a larger deal. I think many of us have heard that. And that's where I started to kind of venture and look at larger deals. And that's where I'm at now today, where I'm doing larger deals, multifamily, got into the hotel, motel business as well. And then here locally in the US, I'm doing land development, new construction. And again, surrounding myself around individuals here locally to be able to do that. So, that process took time. It wasn't like it was, just like a one-step situation. But I think the move to the US, it really got me outside my comfort zone. And it really allowed me to think, all right, I could actually do more than maybe what I think I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Like moving to the US, I'm like, I was in my late 30s at that time. And it wasn't necessarily easy because, again, I didn't know anybody. I wasn't in the system. So it took time for me to build all that. But again, it challenged me. It pushed me outside my comfort zone. And it became natural to constantly push myself. Let's try this. I try that. I don't know how to do Airbnb. Great. Who's doing it? Aaron. Okay, great. I'll partner with Aaron. Yeah. Multifamily. Okay, great. I can do that. But what do I partner with these guys? Great. And all of a sudden, we're buying like, these 25, 30 unit properties. And now the same group, we're looking to acquire, properties across the US as well. So every step was kind of building blocks, and then constantly like pushing myself more and more. And I think that's something for all of us to consider. So you can get complacent, you can be satisfied at one level, but I think there's an internal thing you got to come, I guess, to terms with. If you're happy, great. And sometimes for some people, maybe just be one extra property, and that's fine. But when I made that shift full-time into real estate was when I was like, all right, I'm in this, I'm a realtor here in California, but I just want to continue to grow and just try new things and see where it can go. And that's where the kind of path has been now.
Yeah. I mean, you could take a while to unpack a lot of those things. I love the idea you're outside your comfort zone, the environment, whether you chose to or not, it forced you to think outside the box. And again, back to relationships, right? Your partnerships taught you things and led you places that you wouldn't have maybe even considered doing a partnership. Right. And I do get this sense that it feels very much, having listened to you speak there, feels very much like a business where you start a business, or even a self-employed income, right? You're selling and you're comfortable. And you're like, no, this is good. And some people are fine in that scenario, but every so often you get that one shark that says it's not good enough. And whatever that trigger is, that's the same trigger that hits an investor that says, you know what, now's the time for me to scale. Yeah. I'm curious. So along the way, obviously some things have fallen in your lap, some things you've kind of initiated. For someone who's starting out, as you've followed a very similar path to a lot of where you're building it, you're building. Do you think it's possible or worthwhile for someone to try to grow faster, or would you just shorten the timeline? Like, would you say that growth was necessary, or do you think it's something that had you were to go all the way back and you were connected with someone more familiar with development, for example, that would have been something worth doing years ago?
It's a good question. I think it's a personal thing. Like for myself, I fall in that line. I think most people do, slowly and then slowly ramp up. I've met people who just been laser focused in one particular segment and they've grown rapidly. Like I have a partner who's focused on Airbnb and him and his wife have grown rapidly over the last year and a half. And just been focused on that particular segment, which is great. So in terms of which is better, I'm not necessarily sure. I think it's an internal and individual thing. Time, energy, everyone's dynamics different. If you're married with kids, you're balancing your time and energy. You have a full-time job. Are you doing this part-time? That was another thing. I was in manufacturing for years. So when I got into real estate, I wasn't in it full-time. I was just buying a property on the side, doing some rentals, putting a tenant in place because I had a full-time career. So it's, I think, a personal thing. If you're starting into real estate as the first main focus, you're young enough to say, all right, finish, you graduate from school, okay, into real estate right off the bat, great. And maybe you can ramp things up and focus yourself in one direction and get quickly. At that networking event I mentioned last month, I'm an individual, and I think he was about 21 years old. And he said he quit his job, he's real estate full-time, and he's got like 8 or 9 units. And I was like, wow. I'm like a 21 or 22. I was impressed. So his journey, his situation, a lot different than mine. I got into real estate in my early 30s. This individual was starting 10 years ahead of me and likely not married, likely no kids. So the time and energy and the things he can do, I was not able to. House hacking, like certain things that I have family and kids now. I could not probably do a shared accommodation situation. But if you're single, like looking back, if I'd started earlier, maybe that was a strategy I would have considered. Do multiple house hacking strategies and kind of leverage that way. Everyone's, I guess, kind of leave it at your situation is personal. The way your lifestyle is structured, your family dynamics, your own personal kind of goals and aspirations. We have to kind of be careful. We don't compare ourselves too much, with everyone else. And of course, looking at social media and the posts people share, like they're leaving the best of the best. We don't see that all the details and all the challenges necessarily that go in between all those posts. So something to just be careful that we tread carefully. But if I offer advice, I kind of like leave it. Your situation is unique. So really kind of dive deep into who you are, what you want to do, where you find yourself, and kind of start moving in a direction. But even for myself, like if someone's asking, what's my goal? I don't know. I don't know what my 10-year goal is. I can kind of have an idea, but things have changed significantly over the last 5 years alone. And it's exciting. So I say, you know what, I have some maybe, this year, in the next 12, 15 months, maybe in the next 2 years, I can kind of see the things on the horizon. But 5, 10 years, I'm not necessarily sure. I want to kind of mark it in stone and say, well, I could say I want 1,000 units, right? But in the next couple of years, things may happen that I don't necessarily need 1,000 units, and I'm fine with that. So who knows? I just want to kind of leave it out, like leave that in the audience's mind that, just think of that, make it personal, and then take the action. I think the action is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm getting everyone's getting a flavor of the coaching that I'm talking about here. And I love just letting you kind of speak and kind of digest some of these topics. Now, obviously your situation is you have a family and you're a person of faith. And I'm curious how, like, maybe we can get a little bit more specific on how has that helped you? Obviously, maybe you couldn't do house hacking as easily, but absolutely. Right. I mean, being a married person myself, I know there's benefits that come. And how has that really helped you springboard during the last few years?
Well, I could say one thing, like if it wasn't for my faith, I wouldn't be here today. Literally, like I met my wife through the church. I'd never been to California before. I came here for 4 days through the church. It was for a wedding of someone I knew through the church, and I met my wife. So that was, one little example of kind of like where I am today is through the church. But in terms of faith in general, me and my wife is a top priority. We are involved in our church. We instill our values and faith into our children. And I think it just grounds us. Real estate is great. Financial freedom is great. But if everything's lost, who are we? Ultimately, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm an investor, but if you take away all my property, I still have value. And I think it's important for all of us to kind of remember that. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers and growing portfolio and financial freedom, wealth, and all that good stuff. But strip that all away. Who are you individually? And that's something I think where our faith kind of grounds us and reminds us daily. If you're really into your faith, for us, it's reading scripture, being involved in our church. I'm like, okay, we're seeing people around the world who've got a lot less than what we have, and and they can be content. and satisfied, and they have just as much value as we have. So I think that's an important element that, we just kind of base our lives upon. And then, and then everything else, flows from there in terms of what our faith is and how we move forward with it in the Christian realm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can give, I'm also Christian, and I agree. Faith is a massive component, and it has been for our family too. But in general, I do find that having a faith element, something beyond yourself, is a common trait. It's not just a unique thing, which is why I wanted to bring it up. It's a common trait among people who are super successful because, and I guess it's like this kind of picture of everyone views the wealthy or successful as someone who's unhappy and cruel and mean. And I honestly believe money just allows you to take who you were before and let it shine even more. And so I think getting yourself figured out early on and allowing that to take you and dictate what you do down the road is super important. And same with family too. I mean, I put them in very much the same thing. It's a relationship with those around you and a relationship with the one above you, or however,
Right.
That's how I look at it. But
yeah, no, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think like you made a good point as well, enhancing what was already internally. So like, the more maybe accumulation of wealth and success we have, what are we doing with that? It feels good to help others. So that's one of the things, like, I don't necessarily charge people for my time and energy. Yes, there's value. Obviously, my time, I have to be careful. I don't get too caught up in it. I don't have to compensate my time with maybe with my family. But there's an element of giving back, which feels good inside. And I think there's a whole dynamic that we're meant to help others. We're not to be meant to just live on a little islands in our own, up in the mountains, just kind of totally disconnected from people. So being part of something, a group, a tribe, there's an element of value, helping, giving back, feeling that reciprocating appreciation, and someone else helping you back, kind of going back and forth. So I think it's really important for us to consider that.
Yeah. Okay. So we promised the audience, and I'm also curious. I'd love to hear your take on some of the pros and cons of the US versus Canada, having your feet on both sides. Where should people gravitate based on what? Like, what's your
Right.
first thing that comes to mind when you start thinking about where people want to invest?
Well, that's a great question. I get probably reached out once or twice a month. I want to move to the US. I want to invest in the US. How do I do it? What's the next step? And it's a natural, kind of consideration. Listen, the US is probably a market 10 times the size of Canada in general. If our population is like 30 something million, the US is like 300 million. I mean, the markets in the States, it's a larger market. There's many more places to invest into. And the dynamics are considerably different, from price points to market conditions, that sort of thing. Like, I'm in California, and specifically Southern California. To me, that market is very similar to Toronto. High price market, virtually no cash flow. Most people are, in the appreciation game, development, new builds, that sort of thing. Then you go on market like Tennessee, or even Ohio. I was investing in Ohio a few years ago. And at that time, I could find properties for like $80,000, single family homes that would rent for like $1,000 a month. So huge difference in terms of price points and opportunity. Do you have that in Canada? I don't think you have that, the disparity, anymore. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, yes, Windsor was one of those last markets I find where, relatively, distance wise, the GT, that sort of thing, within like 4 or 5 hour drive, you had properties about $150,000, but no longer. I think the average are like 300,000-400,000 now. So US investing is something that Canadians should consider. The next question is like, okay, how do I do it? So it's very easy. You can look at properties. I mean, you can purchase properties. However, the considerations you need to consider, to think of initially are financing. Are you going to purchase the properties in cash? Well, first, identifying the market. Once you identify the market, then it's like, okay, how are you going to purchase the asset?
Can I just pause you just for a quick second? Would it be a fair assessment for people who want to invest in the US to focus on markets not like those in Southern California? Like, is the strategy to leave Canada intentionally in order to get access to what was Windsor a few years ago and to invest in some of these Ohio style markets?
Yeah,
or would
possibly.
not necessarily?
Right. So cash flow, like a lot of investors want to focus on cash flow, which again is getting more and more challenging in Ontario. So people are expanding in other provinces. So what about expanding into the US? I think it's something you should consider. And there are several markets where the price points are considerably low and cash flow is legitimately available and it's common. I have a friend who purchased a couple of triplexes in Michigan. So there are definitely several markets where the numbers are very attractive. 1% rule,
Yeah.
maybe even 2% rule type of thing, right? So those scenarios exist. So it's like, okay, I want to expand into the States. Why? Cash flow. Okay, great. Lower price points. Okay, great. Those are legitimate. Those are good questions and considerations. Next is how are we going to purchase that asset? So cash obviously is easiest. But if you were to purchase a property all cash, then your numbers start to kind of are different, right? The returns, the rate of return on that investment, it's not going to be the same if you're financial leverage at 80% type of thing. The challenges I find for most non-residents Canadians is the financing component. US lenders, don't necessarily, they're not on the system in the US. So US lenders are less likely to provide financing options to non-residents. Canadian banks, I know TD Royal offer a few options for Canadian want to buy in the US. I think it limits to which states, maybe Florida, kind of some of the specific East Coast kind of areas. They may have representations or branches in the US, but it's not something you can necessarily scale with TD. They may give you one, maybe two options, two mortgages, but that's about it. It's more like a secondary home vacation type of thing. So the next step is to look at secondary lenders, and they look at more like a commercial kind of realm products and that realm. So there are options. There's a few lenders I can connect some Canadians to, but it comes down to going through all that for what reason? Is it better? That's the number. That's ultimately the question you need to think about. To expand to the States, it's a bigger market, potentially more opportunities. In Ontario and Canada in general, it's a smaller pool. You could be content, and guys, they are scaling into hundreds and hundreds of units in Ontario, or take the dive and start looking at elsewhere, where you can look at markets like Texas, where they have like 150, 250 unit apartment complexes, which aren't necessarily available to Canadians in Canada. But once you look at that realm, then the options open up. Yes, it's a higher price, but now it's a commercial asset. The lenders are focusing more on the numbers on the asset. And then, in terms of the structure and the deal, there are options. Obviously, you want to get your lawyer, you want to get your accountants, involved. You want an accountant who's familiar with both sides of the border, that sort of thing. But again, if there's a will, there's a way. If you want to get into the US, I'm happy to help guide. But you can, that's an option for Canadians, and some people are successful at it. I think if you play kind of relatively small, there may be some challenges, or is it really worth it? To go buy one property in Ohio for 80 grand, cash flow. But then, in terms of like the tax implications and how the holding, the vesting entity, is it going to be an LLC? What's not recognized in Canada, an LLC? So then that comes to play. But if you're looking to kind of go larger, I think that's where, as an investor, you may want to consider, okay, let's get into that realm of 50 plus units, where the opportunity and time and effort that you're going to put into it makes sense. It may take 1 year to buy this one asset, but it's worth it if it's 50, 80, 90 units type of thing. So something to think about, and maybe it's an opportunity to kind of like put a team together, a JV situation, partnership situation. So something I think Canadians need to consider. But in terms of the next step, I think it's important. What is that going to be? Small, big, and I would kind of recommend kind of going big. It may take longer, but I think it's going to be worthwhile.
Yeah. So there you go. There's one reason if you want to reach out to Thomas to connect with him. But obviously, you've given us a ton of great value today. I'm sure people are going to want to reach out to you. Tell us where people can find you on social media, online. Where are they best to locate you and your team?
Instagram, Thomas_Lorini #1, or on Facebook, just my full name, Thomas Lorini. My website, thomaslorini.com. Made it pretty easy. But yeah, I think I'm most active on Instagram and Facebook. Those are the places you can contact me. Again, DM me. Happy to kind of like respond. Someone from Toronto is actually in LA this week. They reached out to me. We're gonna grab coffee. Never met the individual. We may have shared a few chats or texts in the past, but it's cool. So again, I'm located in Orange County, just south of Los Angeles. If you're ever ever in this area, reach out. I'd love to kind of meet up and kind of share what I'm doing, learn more about you, and see if we can help each other.
Awesome. Thomas, has been good reconnecting, man. I look forward to chatting and watching your journey along the way. Guys, if you got value of our show today, hit the like button, leave a comment if you have a question for myself or Thomas, and you can share this on Instagram and tag us as well at Watson Estates. But we'll see you again soon, I'm sure.